Hey everyone, and welcome to the Retro channel and to what is, I guess, part 2 of this Sony PlayStation repair. So if you haven't seen part 1, I'll throw a link to that up there and in the video description. You don't necessarily have to watch that. I'm about to spoil it for you if you haven't seen it already. So we've got this PS1. It sort of reads disc, but it is struggling. Now, in the previous episode, I looked at an audio issue, which turned out to be caused by a bunch of bad joints on the digital signal processor, digital audio processor, whatever it's called. I did also check that off camera because I went around the whole chip and just made sure all the other legs were still attached, which they are. So we're all good there. The only thing we really need to sort out right now is this laser assembly. So let's pop this thing out, take a closer look. So here's our little laser assembly, and like I showed in part 1, the spindle does appear to spin freely, which is a good start, and it has a decent gap. I think 0.635 millimeters seems to be a decent gap between the actual motor itself and the spindle on top. So this feeler gauge can push all the way in until it hits the center of the spindle there. If the gap was too large, the disc is going to ride up too high and the laser is going to struggle to focus that far. And of course, if it's too low, the disc will actually rub against the base of this, or the actual spindle won't turn freely, and the laser is going to have a hard time focusing on a disc that is too close to it. So this appears to be the right height, but it's still not reading disc properly. So let's take a closer look at what's going on inside. This video is sponsored by PCBWay. PCBWay offer a wide range of services ranging from PCB prototyping and assembly to CNC machining and 3D printing and a whole lot more. They produce high quality PCBs at a very low cost, and turnaround is incredibly fast. So why not use PCBWay for your next PCB prototyping order? We thank them for sponsoring today's video. The first thing we're going to do is just remove these two Phillips head screws up here. That will give us access to the sled part underneath. Now, to get this cover off, ideally you want the laser to be in a position where it's not up against this spindle, because the cover needs to sort of slide back this way. So what I'm going to do is just apply a little bit of power to this motor here, and that should get the laser moving outwards. Now, I know everyone's not going to have a bench power supply on hand, so another thing you can use is just a AA or a AAA battery. The only tricky part is trying to hold the wires onto the battery itself and also tap them onto the motor here. So I'm just going to solder a couple of bits of wire to this edge just so I've got at least one hand free. The good thing about using a AA battery is it doesn't output much power, so if the sled doesn't move back and forth, then you know that it's either really gummed up or you've got a bad motor or just a flat battery. So I've just got a couple of bits of random wire. We're just going to tack these on to the back of the motor here. Cool, doesn't need to be pretty, we'll eventually take those off. But now we can use our little battery here. I don't know which way around it's going to try and move, but we'll work it out pretty soon. There we go. So obviously swapping that around, we'll move it back in. But as long as it's not pressed up against that spindle, you can now slide this cover off that way. Just like so. And it looks like, I don't know if that's the original grease that's in here. Looks like somebody may have replaced it at some point. But either way, we're going to disassemble all these little gears, take this all out, clean it up, and re-lube everything. So we can lift this little part out here. One thing I don't recommend messing with is the laser output power. These are usually set between around 11 and 1 o'clock on a PS1, and you can see the middle of this one is sitting just past sort of 12 o'clock. I don't change these unless I have to, or unless I can tell that somebody else has previously messed with them. It's very easy to burn out your laser if you do that. You do really need a good oscilloscope to be able to properly resolve the RF signal that's coming off the pickup. So don't mess with these unless you have to. I'd always consider it a last resort. You want to exhaust every other possibility before you go playing around with this trim pot. I'll leave these wires tacked on because we will use them again in the near future, but first of all we want to disassemble this whole thing. So first thing we need to get out is this gear right here, and it's actually held in by a little clip on the underside. So we just need to squeeze those in and that should pop out from the top. With any luck I'll be able to do this with tweezers. And try not to lose it. So that's our gear free. The next thing we want to do is take out the actual laser block. So you want to slide it all the way up to the end and then push this white plastic piece forwards. It may take a bit of effort the first time. This one moved pretty easily, and then that should lift out, and then you should be able to pull the laser block out. Now that we've got that out of the way, we can just remove the rest of these gears. They should all just lift out. We're going to clean all the old lubricant out of this. I'm just going to use some IPA and some Q-tips and maybe a toothbrush. Get all that old lube off and then we'll re-lube it. And of course we don't want to forget this part here on the actual laser block. Just want to make sure we don't flick any IPA or anything into the actual laser lens itself. Now for the toothbrush. So I'm just going to put my hand to cover that lens while I scrub at this. And then I'm going to put that well off to the side so it doesn't get any other dirt in it. Alright, that should be all our parts cleaned. And now we just lube everything back up. This is just white lithium grease, and we're just going to start from the worm gear. So this has a needle tip which is a little bit too small, so it's kind of hard to push this out of this thing, but we're just going to get a bit of that on there. Maybe better off applying it with one of these. I can just load that up and rub it around. That's probably too much, but it'll sort of distribute itself once we get everything back reassembled. Cool, that's that part lubed up. We'll just do the same with the actual little gears, just a tiny amount on these. And our laser block, and I just realized that I forgot to clean out the other rail. So I forgot to get cleaning in this part, oh yeah. And then we just want to hook that side onto that rail, drop that into place. And that feels nice and smooth. So again, push this all the way to the end, stick our plastic piece in, and then slide it back towards us this time to lock it into place. And try very hard not to touch that lens, especially with lubed up fingers. Luckily, I just missed it. And then finally, we just put this gear back through the hole, and once it lines up with all the teeth on the other gears, there we go, it'll click back into place. Sweet, that is done. All of this extra lubricant everywhere, you can always clean off if you're worried about it. And it'll distribute itself pretty evenly once we get this motor going again. That sounds perfectly smooth, and it doesn't seem to be binding up anywhere or slowing down as it moves, so I'm pretty happy that that part is perfect. I'll put the cover back on just to protect everything for now. So again, it should just slide from the back forward. We can now disconnect our wires, but we're actually going to solder them on to the other motor, the spindle motor, which is a little bit trickier to do. Right, that's got it. What we want to test now is the spindle motor, see if it sounds okay, make sure it spins okay, and again, we can just use our AA battery. You probably won't be able to hear that, but it is making a bit of noise. So it does sound like that motor's vibrating around a bit. Could be a bad bearing or something. And I can just feel it vibrating. So obviously if it's trying to read a disc, having a vibrating motor isn't going to help with that. So let's put a tiny drop of oil in the bottom of this motor, see if that improves it. And the oil I'm using is Tri-Flow Superior Lubricant. People like clock oil as well. Apparently that works quite good, but I found this works just fine with the little electric motors. So I'm just going to get the tiniest drop to come out. Here it goes. And just sort of work it in through those gaps. Tiniest little bit. Just sort of give that a light tap. Right, let's run that motor again. And we'll see how it sounds. It's still a little bit noisier than I'd like. I'm just seeing if there's anything stuck under the spindle. Sometimes hair will get stuck right under there, and that will cause many issues, but I'm not seeing any dust or debris in that tiny gap there. So I'm going to go a bit of this stuff. It's WD-40 basically. So that has now just flooded the motor. Alright, so after a douse with some WD-40, the motor does sound a lot better. I still wouldn't really recommend doing it. I'd say that's a last resort if the oil itself doesn't help, because yeah, it can go everywhere, and I don't know if it's going to be good for the motor in the long term, but certainly in the short term, it does sound a lot better. So now that everything is cleaned, lubricated, all that kind of jazz, actually I'll probably go over the lens one more time with some IPA, just because it's possible we may have contaminated that while we were doing all this. Let's throw this back in, see if it'll load up a game properly. No idea why I opened the cover. Probably should take these wires off first. Alright, we'll just use the little LCD test display for this. Doesn't need to be too pretty, we just need to see if this thing actually works. Obviously, I don't have a mod chip anymore, so burnt games are not going to work. Let's try Gran Turismo 2. Try that disc that it originally struggled on. In fact, I think it almost loaded the second disc but didn't work, but it didn't even want to know about this disc. So the sled moved back in, so that's a good start. Come on. Yeah, normally it'd spin up right now and read the wobble groove, I think, but it is not doing that. Still giving us please insert PlayStation CD-ROM. Oh, all that work, and it still isn't happy. Let's just try the other disc. So it almost managed to boot this one last time, but then got stuck. So yeah, it made it up to this point last time and then wouldn't go any further. Same again this time, it just gives up. That's a shame. So let's get this top cover off again and we'll have a closer look at the laser itself. Just use the bench power supply to move this back out. So the lens itself looks perfectly fine, it's nice and clear. Let's just power it on with that cover off, make sure the actual focus is working properly and it's moving the lens up and down. Now of course without a disc on there you don't want to look directly into the laser because that's probably bad for your eyeballs. And being a CD drive, it's probably invisible to us, but we may be able to see it on the camera. One way to find out. Of course it moved back into the center. Is that visible? Nah, might be too much light in here. So the focus coils are definitely working because it's moving it up and down. I assume the side to side movement is right, but it almost looks like it tilts up towards me. Let's see if I can get a better angle on that. And I think I see the problem. If the camera will focus on it, look at my hands, look at my hands. Have a look at this little bit of plastic just here. That's completely broken off. And that'd be why the laser keeps tilting up towards me. That's a major problem. How am I going to fix that? Now, I don't think I've caused that from cleaning the lens. I guess it's possible, but yeah, it's held on by the thinnest bit of plastic around here and they've both just snapped off. That could be a bit of a challenge because it needs to be obviously attached, but it also needs to be somewhat flexible at those joints. Sometimes you can weld plastic back together with acetone depending on the type of plastic, so it could be worth a go. Just going to put a bit on one of these thin cotton sticks. In fact, let's just try acetone on a test spot first. See if it does anything to this plastic. No. So yeah, certain types, I think ABS plastic, acetone will actually cause a chemical reaction and kind of melt it, but this plastic is not reacting to it at all. All right, well, that's not going to work. I don't really want to use super glue because yeah, it does need to have a little bit of flex to it, so super glue will probably just crack or it'll stop this from moving at all. Okay, well, what I've found is this. It is E6000. It's a medium viscosity clear glue, self-leveling formula, waterproof, flexible, non-flammable, and paintable. So this might do the job, and wow, that is tiny font. It says it adheres strongly to leather, rubber, vinyl, and many plastics. Flexible both in cold temperatures and may be used to bond items subject to vibration. Well, that's good because that's what we've got here. Got nothing to lose at this point. Just want to see what it comes out like first. If it hasn't gone hard. Oh, I think this tube has gone bad. I did spot another one, so let me grab that. All right, I found a brand new tube, and this one looks to be made in the USA. So maybe this is the genuine stuff, and this is just the Chinese knockoff stuff. So let's go with this. All right. It's fairly gooey and stringy. Just going to see if we can do this with a little toothpick. Right, now we just have to wait for it to set. Allow 24 hours for curing depending on materials and temperature. Maximum strength may not be reached for 48 to 72 hours. Well, it looks like I'll be waiting a couple of days to find out if this is actually going to work. I guess lucky for you, you don't have to wait at all. Right, and we're back. It's been 3 days, so this has had plenty of time to set. I hope that it works, but I'm not holding out a whole lot of hope. I'd say there's maybe a 50-50 chance of this working, but it does look like it is actually holding at the moment, and it's still flexible. So let's put this back in the PS1 and see what it does. And while I was waiting, I did actually give this thing a clean and a bit of a retro bright, although it's still not quite perfect. It's better than it was, but retro brighting grey plastic is always a bit iffy. Rarely tends to turn out how you'd expect. Let's just power it up without a disc, see what it does, and we'll need to close the door sensor. Okay, it is bowing up and down, and it's no longer trying to tilt up towards me. See if we can get a better angle on it. So yeah, that looks good. All right, the moment of truth. Let's see what it does. Well, it's detected the disc, so it's not complaining that it's a copy. Come on, keep going. And I think it just gave up. Ah, that's a shame. Let's just take that off for a second. Let's just test the focus on this. If I present this reflective bit of disc, I can see that it does actually grab focus on it. Obviously struggles to hold it because it's just a random piece of a CD. But I can actually get it to hold focus briefly and move the lens up and down as I move the disc with it. Let's try the other disc of Gran Turismo, because I know this was mostly working before. See how far it'll get. Wow, so it's actually faring a lot better with this disc. But like I said, I know that the other disc, other PlayStations can actually read it, even though it is in pretty bad condition. So maybe it'll be okay if your disc is in perfect condition, but yeah, I still wouldn't call it a complete success. Let's say that. Yeah. It's close. It's so close. Right, well, it seems at this point we have nothing to lose, so let's take this a step further. So what we're going to try and do is clean the mirror that sits under this lens. So you've got the laser and pickup back in this area, and they shoot that way, hit the mirror, which is at a 45-degree angle, and that goes up through the lens. So it's possible that that mirror is somewhat dirty or dusty, and maybe cleaning that will be all we need to do. There's only one way to find out though. But yeah, I definitely don't recommend doing this unless you're running out of options. We'll take that little screw off, and then there's 2 clips on either side of this black plastic piece that need to come off. Just need to sort of pop them up from either side. Let's get zoomed in. So I don't think I'll be able to show it on camera, or you might just be able to see it under the lens there. There's that little shiny thing. That is our mirror. So once again, just going to use some IPA, clean that off, see if it makes any difference. And really the only way to get into there is from this side. Just going to lift the lens up a little bit, and we're in. Like I said, this is sort of the last resort before you go twiddling with the laser power potentiometer, which can easily burn out your laser. This is slightly less risky. And we'll give that lens another quick wipe down. All right, reassemble all this, give it another try. Here goes nothing. Oh. So far, so good. Oh, that's different. Come on. Yes. We have the intro FMV. I'm probably going to have to mute the audio. What I can tell you is it is skipping. That's so close now. There is a slight wobble on this disc. I wonder if that's affecting it. The intro FMV is right on the outside of the disc, which is where we're going to have the most wobble. It does seem to ride up around there. If I rotate this, is it the disc? Nah, the disc isn't perfectly flat. So after all this, I was pretty much ready to give up on this PS1. In fact, in the first cut of this video, I did give up on this PS1. But I felt kind of bad because we've come so far and we're so close to having a fully working machine. I couldn't help myself but play with it a little bit more. So what I've actually done is reinstalled a new mod chip. I didn't go by the conventional wiring diagrams that I found online, so I didn't actually record that part because I was kind of making it up as I went along, but it is mounted, it is not moving anywhere, and it's not going to cause us any future problems lifting any legs on other ICs. So I'm perfectly happy with how that mod chip is now sitting. If you look closely, you can just see it through the back there. It's sort of sitting upside down, squished flat to the board, like a little dead bug should be. So now we once again have a modded PS1 that can read some discs. It just struggles to read ones that have a major warp to them. And that's not really good enough. You can't expect every disc to be perfectly flat that goes in this machine. So I think it all boils down to that broken suspension piece, and the glue that I've used just isn't quite flexible enough to allow the focus lens to move up and down freely. I don't really have a solution for that, so we're going to go to plan B. And plan B is to steal some parts out of this PS1. It has a bad spindle motor, it rattles around like nothing else, but the laser might actually be okay in this thing. So if we steal the laser from this one and stick it in our other one, we may just end up with a working machine again. This is a SCPH5502 unit, so it does actually have the parallel port, and I believe these particular ones also are compatible with the X Station. So even if we don't find a replacement laser for this, I can always just throw an X station in it sometime in the future, which I might actually do. So let's pull the laser out of this one and swap it into our late model PS1. As you can see, the drives themselves are pretty much the same. The only major difference is these flat flex cables route to different points on the board, so they have a slightly different bend in them, and the motor cables are different lengths depending on where they need to reach to on the main board. Thankfully, that shouldn't be an issue for us, so we can actually swap these lasers between these two machines. Let's try it out. First of all, we'll get the laser out of this busted one. And yes, I did actually go in here and re-lubricate everything and then discovered that the spindle motor was bad. So at least I've kind of saved myself some hassle there. Let's get this cog out. Try not to mess up my tweezers. And once again, you just slide this to the end. And these can sometimes be tricky to get out, so sometimes it's easier just to sort of lift both ends of this plastic piece and then slide it up. And that is our laser out. We just need to do the same with the other one. Right, out with the old, in with the slightly older. And it's going to go back in this machine. So our motor wire is no problem. And this, which normally routed to somewhere down here, needs to go up here. That should be fine. It's not going to get in the way of any discs or anything like that. No problem. Might just give that lens a quick wipe over. All right, I think we're ready to test this out for hopefully the very last time. Let's just do a quick test without a disc. That all looks pretty normal. Now the challenge, will it read this fairly scratched and somewhat warped disc? So far so good. It's working. Probably can't hear it. That's probably a good thing because probably get a contact match if I turn it up too much. It is playing that track just fine, and it's not skipping at all. That is quite the relief. Pretty much without a working CD drive for one of these later model PlayStations, they're basically useless because they don't have the parallel port and they don't accept the X station or, as far as I'm aware, any other optical drive emulator. So without a working laser in one of these machines, it's pretty much junk. I think one last thing to test it with is a very scratched up audio CD. Some of you may have spotted this on the bench before. Yes, it's the best of Def Leppard. This isn't one of my discs. I found this in a random CD wallet, but yeah, it's been scratched up to hell. So either somebody really liked Def Leppard or somebody didn't like Def Leppard so much.
Def Leppard sucks!
That's a pretty rich statement coming from Kid Rock. Now, it may not read this first time, and that's more down to the MM3 mod chip and an issue with booting it with an audio CD inserted. So, see how we go. No. There are a couple of workarounds for the MM3 mod chip. If you hold down the reset button for 2 seconds and release, that will put it into, I think, the non-stealth mode, which I still don't think will work with audio CDs. But if you hold down reset button again for 2 more seconds and release, this should put it into the old Crow mode or the older modchip mode. This should hopefully work with this audio disc. That's better. So this is like the test disc that I've got. It's one of the most scratched up discs that I have, but a good CD player will still be able to read it. It might jump around in the first track a little bit. And obviously I cannot play much audio from this, but I've never needed someone so bad. Yeah. So yeah, it even reads a very scratched up audio disc. So this laser and assembly is in tip-top shape. One other workaround if you've got an MM3 mod chip and you want to put an audio CD in is just to boot the PS1, let it get into the menu, head into the audio CD player first, and then put your audio CD in the tray. So if I do that and reinsert the disc, it'll load it up just fine. Just a little quirk with the MM3 mod chip. There are other mod chips out there, but we're not going to go into that today. This was a video on the laser assembly and all that kind of stuff and getting it to work. And I think we've finally accomplished that. So there's only one thing left to do, I reckon. And that is bring out a CRT. This is the little Sony CRT that I did an unboxing video on the channel about a year ago. It was new old stock. And since then we haven't really seen it. I did actually go ahead and do an RGB mod on this, but unfortunately I didn't film that. The good news is that Mr. Lurch may have another one of these. So hopefully sometime in the near future we'll actually do an RGB mod on one of these little Sony CRTs. But for now, I think it's time for some gaming. Had me worried for a second that I thought it had died. Let's do it. Overscan's cutting that off a little bit. Anyway, I think that is certainly it for this Sony PlayStation repair series. It took quite a bit longer than I had planned, but the end result I'm more than happy with. So as always, a huge thanks to the people that support the channel on Patreon. If you want to do the same, links to that are down in the video description. Yeah, thank you all for watching, liking, subscribing. Be sure to leave a comment if you like. One thing I didn't show, which I'm sure some people would have liked to have seen, was adjusting the laser intensity, the RFI pattern. Honestly, I don't have a scope that's capable of that. This Handtech scope back here isn't able to resolve the eye pattern properly, and even my little portable scope kind of can do it, but it struggles a bit. So as I said from the start, there's a good chance that adjusting the laser intensity isn't going to solve your problem. It may mask it a little bit, but if the laser's not working properly, there's a good chance that there's something else wrong with your machine. So maybe one day we'll look at adjusting the laser intensity, but it's not going to be until I get a half decent scope, and that means it's not going to be until I wrangle up $700 or $800 for something decent. So yeah. At least we do have a sacrificial laser that I can use, which is the one that was originally in this machine. So if we burn that out, I guess it wouldn't be so bad. But yeah, like I said, not going to go into that. And until I have a decent oscilloscope, it's just not going to happen. Anyway, I've babbled on way too long, and I've got some Tenshu to play. So thank you for watching. See you next time. always feel bad doing this.